Howdy folks, welcome back. I'm your host, the Mighty Bjorn, and today for you, new episode of Community Steel, but let's get really quick here. A couple things in here really quick before we dive on into today's featured vehicles. Let's start off with the fact that I do have a Patreon page, so if you'd like to give my channel some extra support, that is the way to do it. Link is down below in the video description, as well as don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Also, share the video around. That does help me out as a YouTuber, because I am constantly fighting uphill with the YouTube algorithm, the evil gods that they are. Either way, folks, let's dive on into today's first vehicle. This is this Salamander Waffentrager from Gentle Bean. This weighs in at 34.87 tons. It is actually armed with a 150 millimeter main gun with 337 millimeters of penetration. This is for the late war period. I actually don't think it's a bad vehicle. I really like the look of it. The only thing I really had an issue with was the optic itself. The gunnery optic is up over the gun shield, if you didn't take notice. And one problem I was constantly having is when I was using the gun depression to its maximum, such as on a downgrade slope, trying to stay hull down, that gun shield would actually block the optic. However, that being said, it does look like a fairly realistic vehicle. Kind of feels like it's based off of more or less, well, something like the Waffentrager E100 or the Scorpion or the Rheinmetall Borsig, or any of those vehicles that Germany would have had in service that were open topped with a turret, had a huge gun, etc., etc. Besides huge guns, my God, this gun is awesome. That penetration, the accuracy of it. I mean, I wasn't completely old and shit with it, and yeah, it's got some good velocity. It was penetrating vehicles, no problem. Just did really well. Speed-wise, not too bad. Has an overlapping suspension. I like that. That's a great feature. I mean, honestly, just a really well done, really good looking vehicle, and it seems like it's a legit vehicle, which I always appreciate those. The next one I have here is from Camo Man, and this is his Clipper. Or at least that's what he called it. I'm not quite sure what the name's for, but okay. So what we have here is a 19.27 ton, 20 millimeter autocannon armed vehicle. It's got 53 millimeters of penetration. It is for the early war period, and in all honesty, it kind of feels like a Panzer IV or something similar with a different type of turret, mounting an autocannon instead of mounting, per se a 75 millimeter gun or something like along those lines, or at least that kind of feels like what the basis was he was going for. The only problem is I was having issues with the gun itself, so I'm not sure what's going on with that. But basically, one time it would act as an autocannon, next it wouldn't. I think that's more along the lines of the flaws with Sprocket itself, more than anything else. Now, the armor of this vehicle really wasn't very good. I didn't really expect it to be, considering a lot of the earlier Panzer IVs really didn't have anything in the way of armor, and of course the armor was really flat. And of course the vehicles I'm going up against here, they have an actual anti-tank gun versus, an autocannon. So while this would be a really good vehicle to use up against, say, light tanks, or as an infantry support vehicle, fire support vehicle, this would not be, it didn't really do well against actual legit combat tanks, and it wouldn't do well against stuff like the Samua S-35 or anything like that. But it did have its moments of doing pretty well here, especially when I could get along the side of an enemy tank and could just start letting loose with the autocannon, at least when the autocannon worked properly. Like I said, I think that's more of a Sprocket thing than Camo Man's overall design. Who knows? Either way, I didn't think this vehicle was bad. I rather liked the look of it. He definitely took his time, really fleshed out the look of it. And actually, I think the color is pretty neat too. Kind of like this grayish green he's got going on. So very gnarly vehicle, all in all, with that being said. Okay, I got another Waffentrager here, folks. This is the Waffentrager 1.2 cm from the Krum, and this weighs in at 53.27 tons. It's armed with a 120 millimeter main gun. That's kind of obvious when it's in the name. And it's got 356 millimeters of penetration. This is for the late war period, and I do like this one. This kind of feels more like a Waffentrager E100, although the turret is familiar with another Waffentrager design, but I can't remember what design it was, where it's kind of sort of got a hexagonal turret where the turret plating is sloped and all that stuff. I believe it's a tier 7 in World of Tanks. I think it's a tier 7 premium tank destroyer armed with an 88 millimeter gun is the one I'm thinking about. But this one's got some nice wide tracks. It's got a low silhouette. The gun depression is really not horrible for how low the silhouette is, although it doesn't have the world's greatest gun depression. Their turret traverse is actually really good. It's a lot better than I thought it would have been. The next thing is the speed. Speed's not bad. It accelerates pretty good, but it really slows down, I noticed, when turning. And I think what the issue there is, it's got to do more with the width of the tracks. Tracks really aren't extremely long, understand, and the width is actually pretty wide compared to how long it is. So I think that's why it slows down so much while turning. But either ways, I like the look and the feel of this vehicle. You got a rear-mounted engine, probably a front-mounted well, I think actually the transmission was in the rear of this as well, because that's where the sprockets are, the drive wheels. But I did like the vehicle for sure. All right, the next one I got here is the Amphibious E3 from Nathan the Dummy. This weighs in at 18.91 tons. It's armed with a 77 millimeter main gun, although it does have the machine gun turrets also modeled and functional. And the 77 millimeter gun has 79 millimeters of penetration. This one is actually for the interwar period, and I really like this one. This I wouldn't say it's the coolest looking vehicle I've ever seen, although it's very well done when it comes to looks. Especially because he took time to do the suspension, it looks like to me. Kind of has like a bogey type suspension. But the thing is this feels like kind of that interwar multi-turret infantry tank that you see in the interwar period. Performance-wise, it didn't really perform extremely well here for speed. On flat terrain, I imagine this thing can get up and get going pretty good, though, for an interwar period tank. And that being said, I didn't really expect much for top speed because it is an interwar tank. Now, the thing that was cool was definitely the machine guns. The machine guns can definitely get up and ripping. The armor actually handled fairly well. I wouldn't call it reliable armor, but it will definitely bounce some shots for you. And yeah, just overall, the whole design itself looks really good. I think it's really well done. It felt like I was playing an interwar period tank where they kind of had an idea of what tanks should be, but didn't really know for sure what tanks should be yet. Kind of one of those deals. So here we go. We got one for World War I. It's been a while since I featured anything for World War I. And this is actually a legit tank, too. It's actually the United States Ford 3-ton tank. And first off, it didn't see service in World War I. It was a little late. And yeah, essentially it's just a rolling machine gun. By the way, this is from Rasputis, and it weighs in at 4.5 tons. It does have the machine gun actually modeled, and it's got 20 millimeters of penetration. And like I said, it's for the World War I period. Now, it's very thin armored. Now, that being said, at the time, World War I, basically it needed enough armor protection for machine guns, and that was about it. And that's about all this vehicle actually would have had. Now, this does not have a turret. This is fixed mounted. The machine gun is. It does a great job crossing trenches. The mobility for World War I is actually rather good. I was really impressed with its mobility. Now, compared to a late war tank, it'd be really poor, but Yeah, for World War One, just great mobility. I cannot mention that enough. The armor was unreliable. I kind of expected as much. I mean, it did bounce a couple shots here and there when I was doing my testing, but the armor is just not reliable. Basically, the anti-tank guns can penetrate this thing, the artillery can destroy this thing. But like I said, it's not a heavy tank. It was not meant to be a heavy tank. Essentially, it was just meant to be a mobile machine gun platform for infantry units, more or less. And that's essentially what this vehicle is. It does a great job on that, as you can see there. I was able to take out that anti-tank gun. Unfortunately, I got destroyed by another anti-tank gun. Yeah, see how that worked out for me. But as you can see, this thing can actually get up and rip and roar, and actually pretty good for a World War One tank. All right, the final victim I have here. This is also from Nathan Dummy. This is the Amphibious PV3. This weighs in at 6.24 tons. It's armed with a 20 millimeter cannon. It's got 15.5 millimeters of penetration, so not much in the way of penetration. And I think the stats was showing up wrong for me. I don't think it's a 20 millimeter cannon. I actually think it's supposed to be a machine gun, but I could be mistaken, especially considering that the penetration is lower than the caliber. And this is for the interwar period. And this is definitely a really cool vehicle. You know, it's a boat that's a tank, and there's multiple countries throughout the years that has messed with this kind of concept. This is definitely based along the lines of what probably the Soviets would have done for a boat amphibious tank type deal. Japan really liked these types of tanks, so I kind of feel like, yeah, this would be a legit thing that Russia would try to do, maybe try to clone, you know, a captured Japanese tank that also works as a boat. Now this one looks like, to me, looking at the overall design, it looks like it's actually supposed to be like this. But the Japanese ones, what it was is it was like a boat hull that would be mounted to the tank hull, and that could be kind of discarded after the amphibious landings were done. So this, it looks like to me that's not what goes on here. It looks like to me that this is the legit tank, but I could be mistaken, and I'm sure Nathan the Dummy, when he sees this video, he'll comment down below on if, you know, if the boat hull part of this thing is separate from the tank, or am I looking at the actual whole tank. Either way, I think it's really cool, looks great, very well detailed, even took time to do the snorkel, if you will. But anyway, folks, that's going to be it for today's episode of Community Steel. Hopefully you all enjoyed it. Thank you very much for tuning in, and have yourself a wonderful day.